Get out, Dad. You're fired. My son Julian's voice was devoid of warmth, his eyes glittering with a cold, dismissive contempt that felt alien to me. For 11 years, I had poured my lifeblood into building his company, sacrificing my time, my health, and precious moments with his late mother. And now, over a manufactured argument about fiscal caution, he had thrown me out like yesterday's garbage. I stood there, the silence of the boardroom pressing in on me, my mind a maelstrom of shock and betrayal. As I silently turned to pack my things, a plan was already beginning to ripen in the dark soil of my anger. He thought he was erasing me, but he was wrong. There was a document in his safe, a single file that held the keys to all his dirty secrets. This Thursday, his carefully constructed world was going to come crashing down. I wouldn't just leave. I would methodically, and justly, destroy everything he had stolen from me. The conference room at Vanguard Innovations was a sterile cage of glass and steel, the Seattle skyline a backdrop of jagged, indifferent peaks. The air buzzed with a palpable tension, the hum of the overhead projector a faint drone beneath the sharp, cutting edge of Julian's voice. You're stuck in the past, Dad. Your methods are archaic. He snapped the words, his expensive Swiss watch ticking sharply as he jabbed a manicured finger in my direction. Architectural blueprints and financial projections littered the polished mahogany table, some stamped with the stark red of confidential. I sat rigid in my leather chair, my knuckles white as I gripped a folder containing my latest quarterly audit. 11 years of my life. 11 years of sweat, sleepless nights, and deferred dreams had gone into building Vanguard Innovations from a two-man startup in a cramped garage into this multi-million-dollar behemoth. And now, my own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, was systematically tearing my legacy apart in front of the very people I had hired and mentored. Across the table, Camilla Reed, Julian's COO and co-conspirator, leaned back, her diamond earrings glinting like tiny, cruel daggers. Arthur, your constant audits are a bottleneck, she said, her voice a smooth, venomous purr. In today's market, we need agility, not antiquated checks and balances. The other executives, people I'd shared lunches and celebrated holidays with, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their eyes darted from me to the floor, to the windows, anywhere but at the public execution taking place. I felt the crushing weight of their collective silence. They chose their careers, their bonuses, their proximity to power over loyalty. I couldn't entirely blame them, but it didn't lessen the sting. You're fired. Julian's words, though expected, sliced through the air with the finality of a guillotine. His eyes, cold and unyielding, held no trace of the child I had raised, the young man whose college tuition I had paid by working 2 jobs. A few inaudible gasps rippled through the room, but no one dared to speak. No one moved. I rose from my chair slowly, the sound of it scraping against the floor unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. The folder trembled in my grip. Fired, I repeated, my voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to surprise even myself. You forget who wrote the source code for our flagship product, Julian. You forget who secured the first round of funding when all you had was a half-baked idea and my reputation. He smirked, a twisted, ugly expression that didn't reach his eyes. He picked up my audit folder and tossed it onto the table. The papers fluttered out like broken wings, scattering across the mahogany. Progress doesn't care about your sacrifices, old man. This is a new era. Camilla's lips curled in a silent, triumphant agreement. She had been whispering in his ear for years, stoking his ambition, poisoning him against my caution, my ethics. I turned, my steps deliberate, and walked towards the door. The glass walls of the conference room reflected my solitary shadow, a ghost haunting the empire I had built. In the hallway, the familiar faces of my employees turned away as I approached. Their averted gazes were a fresh layer of humiliation. My office door, usually a symbol of my authority and a sanctuary of hard work, stood ajar, now a space I was banished from. Inside, the scent of old books and coffee, the scent of my life for the past decade, filled my lungs. On my desk, a silver-framed photo of Eleanor, my late wife, watched me. Her smile, frozen in time, was a painful reminder of happier days, of a shared dream. I carefully slipped the photo into the inner pocket of my jacket, leaving behind the meaningless awards and corporate trinkets. They were hollow symbols now. My hand brushed against a folder on Camilla's desk as I passed her empty workspace on my way out. Project Nightingale, CR authorization only. A spark flickered in my mind. Another secret. Another lie. Julian's voice, muffled but clear, echoed from the conference room. "Now we're finally free," he muttered to Camilla. Free from his sentimental, outdated baggage. Free from what? From me? From ethics? From the truth? I stepped into the elevator, the polished steel doors closing with a soft, final ding. My reflection stared back, a graying, tired man, but with a fire rekindling in his eyes. The warmth of Eleanor's photo pressed against my chest. Julian thought he'd won. He thought he'd discarded the old man. But I knew where the real truth was hidden. It wasn't just in some file on Camilla's desk. It was in his own office, in the chrome-plated safe behind that gaudy, overpriced painting he called art. And I knew that this coming Thursday, when the office was empty for the quarterly cleaning service, would be very, very interesting. My small office, a room that had once been the engine of Vanguard innovations, now felt like a mausoleum. It smelled of stale coffee and decades of printed paper, a time capsule of a life's work now rendered obsolete. I stood alone in the center of the room, my hand in my pocket, my fingers tracing the worn edges of Eleanor's photograph. The top of my old oak desk bore a faint, crescent-shaped scar, a mark left from the day we signed our first major contract, a day of shared champagne and boundless optimism. I was 35 then, the same age Julian was now. Back when he would run to show me his report cards, his face beaming with pride in his dad, not plotting my corporate demise. I began to pack, slowly, methodically. The motions were mechanical, a defense against the wave of emotion threatening to crest over me. Awards for innovation and leadership clinked into a plain cardboard box. Plaques recognizing growth, integrity, trust, values that were now openly mocked in the boardroom. One caught my eye, a joint award for Father-Son Duo of the Year from the Chamber of Commerce, presented 5 years ago. Julian's grin had been genuine then, his arm slung around my shoulder. I stared at it for a long moment before leaving it on the empty desk. The past couldn't save me now, it could only serve as fuel. My hands moved, folding 11 years of my life into a box. A desk drawer creaked open, revealing a letter from Eleanor, written on the day we launched the company. "You're stronger than you think, Arthur. You built this from nothing. Never forget that." I swallowed the lump in my throat, carefully tucking the letter into my wallet. This company had been my greatest sacrifice. It had meant countless late nights, weekends spent debugging code instead of being with her, with Julian. And for what? So my son could spit on my legacy in front of the world I had built for him. The hallway was a gauntlet of whispers and averted eyes as I carried my box toward the exit. Colleagues I had promoted, whose weddings I had attended, now glanced away, their pity a sharper blade than Julian's outright scorn. At the security desk, Mike, the guard I'd known for years, hesitated. "Mr. Vance." "Arthur. I'm so sorry." "Don't be, Mike," I said, managing a weak nod. His eyes, at least, held a flicker of respect, a faint comfort in a sea of betrayal. Outside, the infamous Seattle rain greeted me, a cold, persistent drizzle that began to soak through the cardboard box. The city roared on around me, the hiss of bus brakes, the distant cry of a ferry horn, 1,000 footsteps of a world that didn't care about my personal tragedy. My coat clung to me, heavy with water, but I kept walking. The box sagged, its contents threatening to spill, but I held it tight. Eleanor's photo, nestled in my jacket, stayed safe and dry. I reached a public trash can and, with a sense of grim finality, tossed my office keycard inside. The plastic clattered against the wet garbage. A final goodbye to a life that was no longer mine. In my car, the familiar smell of worn leather and old coffee was a small comfort. I sat for a long time, the rain drumming a somber rhythm on the roof. My mind drifted back to a tense budget meeting last year. Julian had presented projections for a new project, and I had questioned the client's numbers. They seemed inflated, unrealistic. Julian's laugh had been nervous, dismissive. He'd brushed off my concerns, but I'd seen him later that week, hastily tucking a thin, red-bordered report into his office safe. I had only caught a glimpse, but it was enough. A single page, dense with figures that didn't match the official filings. A page damning enough to unravel everything. The engine of my old sedan growled to life. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. That document was my ace in the hole. Julian thought he'd buried me today. But he had only planted a seed of retribution. Rain tapped against the windows of my quiet suburban home, a steady rhythm against the profound silence. I sat at the kitchen table, Eleanor's photo propped up against the sugar bowl. Her eyes, captured in a moment of laughter, seemed to follow me, her silent presence urging me on. The house creaked and groaned around me, a symphony of old wood and older memories. On the living room wall hung a framed photo of the three of us, me, Eleanor, and a 10-year-old Julian, all of us laughing on a ferry to Bainbridge Island. That boy was gone, replaced by a cold-eyed stranger in a tailored suit. My mind kept replaying a scene from a month ago. I'd walked into Julian's office unannounced to discuss a staffing issue. He'd been standing by his safe, which was hidden behind that absurdly ugly abstract painting. He was rifling through papers, his face tight with anxiety. He hadn't seen me at first. He'd pulled out that same red-bordered report, scanned it, and then slammed the safe shut when he noticed me in the doorway. But it wasn't before I saw the letterhead, a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. It screamed fraud. Tax evasion, money laundering, maybe worse. That document was no longer just a suspicion, it was my weapon. I paced the living room, the floorboards groaning under my restless steps. My office key card was gone, but the old-fashioned physical key. I'd lied to myself about tossing it. I knew it had to be here. I began to search, my movements growing more frantic. Desk drawers rattled, spilling old pens, faded receipts, one of Eleanor's silk scarves. The scent of her perfume, faint but unmistakable, hit me like a physical blow. Finally, in a dusty box of her old keepsakes, I found it. A single, rusted key, attached to a faded Vanguard Innovations key fob. I placed it on the table beside Eleanor's photo. A silent vow was taking shape in my mind. I sat back down and began to scribble on a notepad. A list of names, contacts who might help. Ben Carter, a tenacious investigative journalist I trusted. And Marcus Thorne, a lawyer who owed me a significant favor from years ago. My phone buzzed as I dialed Marcus. "Arthur? Everything okay?" he asked, his voice a familiar, gruff baritone. "I'm fine," I lied. "I need some advice. Off the record. Julian is hiding something. Something financial." There was a long pause on the other end. "Be careful, Arthur. He's not the kid you raised." Marcus's warning hung in the air long after I'd hung up. Was I truly prepared to destroy my own son? The question gnawed at me, a sickening knot of doubt. But then I looked at Eleanor's face, her expression steady and principled. She would have demanded justice, not blind mercy. I pictured the safe again, its combination a puzzle I was sure I could solve. Birthdays? Anniversaries? Julian was arrogant, but also sentimental in his own predictable way. Inside that safe was the proof of his and Camila's corruption. My coffee cup tipped over, the dark liquid pooling on the oak table like a spreading stain. A mess, just like the one that was coming. I stood up, grabbing my coat. The old, rusted key felt cold and heavy in my palm. Tonight, I would start the process of taking back what was mine. The service entrance of the Vanguard Innovations Tower loomed before me, a dark slash in the building's gleaming facade. The alley was slick with the night's earlier rain, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt and garbage. My old key felt heavy in my palm, its rusted edges a stark contrast to the modern steel door. I glanced up and down the alley, which was empty save for a stray cat that darted past, a fleeting shadow. Julian's safe. The red-bordered report. The image was burned into my mind. I'd seen him shove it in there, his hands shaky, after our tense exchange a month ago. He thought it was his ultimate protection. Tonight, it would become his undoing. He held the key, a cold piece of metal that could unlock his revenge or seal his own ruin. Arthur was about to cross a line, but is he justified in doing so? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to see what secrets he uncovers. The key turned in the lock with a reluctant, grinding groan. I froze, every muscle tensed, but the sound was swallowed by the city's ambient hum. No alarms blared. No footsteps echoed. I slipped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind me. The service corridor was dark, illuminated only by the faint, greenish glow of the exit signs. My rubber-soled shoes whispered on the linoleum, each step a calculated gamble. The security cameras blinked their red eyes from the ceiling corners, but I knew their blind spots. Years of late nights and early mornings had taught me the building's secrets. Julian's office was at the far end of the executive floor. Its double doors of frosted glass were an imposing barrier. My heart thudded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat, but my hand was steady as I used a credit card to slip the latch. A simple, old-school trick for a door designed more for show than for real security. Inside, the room smelled of his cologne, a sharp, arrogant scent. The absurd painting hung above his desk. I carefully eased it off its hook, wincing as the corner of the heavy frame grazed the floor. The safe stared back at me, a seamless chrome square set into the wall. Its digital keypad glowed faintly. I took a breath and entered the date of Eleanor's birthday. The irony was a bitter pill. A red light flashed. Access denied. My heart sank. Of course. He wouldn't use her memory. He had none. I tried his own birthday. Access denied. Then, on a whim, I tried the date the company was founded. A date he had claimed to forget at the last anniversary dinner. Click. A soft green light pulsed. The safe door swung open. And there it was. The red-bordered report. A thin stack of papers that held the weight of his entire empire. The numbers screamed fraud. Falsified invoices, offshore accounts, wire transfers to the Cayman Islands Shell Corporation. And on the last page, a series of authorized signatures. Julian's, and next to it, Camilla Reed's. A photograph fluttered out from between the pages, Julian and Camilla on a yacht, champagne glasses raised, their smiles smug and triumphant. My jaw tightened. I stuffed the report into the inner pocket of my jacket. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, coming down the hall. A security guard. My mind raced. There was nowhere to hide. I dove under the massive mahogany desk, my knees scraping hard against the carpet. I pulled myself into the shadows, trying to silence my ragged breathing. The office door creaked open. The beam of a powerful flashlight swept across the room, painting a moving slash of light on the walls. It grazed the painting, which was still leaning against the wall where I'd left it. My breath caught in my throat. Eleanor's photo, in my jacket pocket, felt like a warm, protective hand over my heart. "This is for you," I whispered silently. "All clear up here," the guard muttered into his radio, his voice echoing in the cavernous office. The door creaked shut. I waited, counting the seconds, my heart hammering. 1 minute. 2. Then, I scrambled out, my legs stiff. I didn't bother putting the painting back. Let him know. Let him feel the fear. I slipped out the way I came in, the report a heavy weight against my ribs. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean. I hurried down the alley, but a car's engine purred to life at the far end, its headlights slicing through the darkness, moving too slowly to be random. My pulse spiked. They were already looking for me. I clutched the report and vanished into the labyrinth of the sleeping city. My kitchen table had become a war room. The stolen report was spread out before me, its damning figures illuminated by the harsh overhead light. Coffee steamed in a chipped mug, its bitterness a grounding force against the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Eleanor's photo sat propped against the salt shaker, her steady gaze a silent source of strength. Be smarter, not louder, she had told me once during a difficult negotiation. That was my plan now. Cold, precise, and utterly devastating. The report's numbers told a clear story of systematic fraud. Fake invoices to non-existent suppliers, laundered money cycled through offshore accounts, and at the center of it all, Project Nightingale, the slush fund Camilla had authorized. Julian was the face of the company, but she was the architect of its corruption. I traced a line of illicit transactions with my finger, a cold anger simmering inside me. 11 years of my sweat, my integrity, and they had turned our shared dream into a criminal enterprise. Not anymore. I scanned the pages onto my old, noisy printer, the hum of the machine a quiet ally in the silent house. The original document went into my own home safe, a squat, fireproof box hidden in the back of my closet. The irony was not lost on me, locking their secrets away in a safe, just as Julian had done. My pen scratched across a legal pad. Journalist. Lawyer. Proof. The first steps of my counter-offensive. I dialed Ben Carter, the investigative reporter I'd known for years. Ben, it's Arthur Vance. I have something big for you, I said, keeping my voice low. Off the record, for now. Arthur, his tone was wary but intrigued. This wouldn't be about the internal rumblings at Vanguard, would it? Julian has been dodging my calls for a week. You'll get your story, I promised. Check your secure Dropbox in the morning. I hung up before he could ask more questions. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. The old house creaked, its familiar sounds a comfort against the storm brewing inside me. I locked my own safe, whispering to the photo of my wife, "Your move is over, Julian." My plan was solidifying. Each piece was a step towards a justice they would never see coming. A sudden, sharp knock at the front door jolted me from my thoughts. 3 quick, hard raps. It was too late for a neighbor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I quickly hid the copied report under a pile of newspapers and pocketed the rusted key from the table. I moved towards the door, the floorboards groaning a protest under my weight, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the empty, rain-slicked porch. But I knew I wasn't alone. The downtown cafe buzzed with the morning rush, the air thick with the aroma of coffee and steamed milk. I sat in a shadowed corner booth, the copied report now sealed in a plain manila envelope. Ben Carter slid in across from me, his coat damp from the Seattle drizzle, his reporter's eyes sharp and appraising. "This better be worth my time, Arthur," he said, tapping a pen on his worn notebook. I pushed the envelope across the sticky table. "Read it first," I said. "No names, no sources. Just the facts." My voice was calm, but my fingers instinctively brushed against the wallet in my pocket, where Eleanor's photo was tucked away. It was my talisman. Ben skimmed the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. The pen stopped tapping. "This is explosive," he muttered, looking up at me. "If this is real, Vanguard is done." "Dig," I said, leaning back. "You'll find more." He nodded, a hunter who had just caught the scent of his prey. "Give me a week." I stood and left the envelope with him, walking out of the cafe's warmth and back into the city's relentless pulse. Horns blared. Pedestrians rushed past. For the first time in days, I felt a surge of adrenaline that wasn't born of fear, but of purpose. Julian's mocking laughter from the boardroom echoed in my memory. He had called me a relic. Not anymore. Miles away, in the glass tower of Vanguard Innovations, chaos was beginning to reign. I didn't need to be there to imagine it. Papers were scattered across Julian's desk, a cracked phone screen glinting under the recessed lighting. Camila was pacing, her heels clicking an agitated rhythm on the floor. Someone talked, she would be hissing, clutching her phone. My contact at the time says a reporter is sniffing around, asking about offshore accounts. Julian would slam his fist on the desk, a glass of water tumbling to the floor. You said that report was secure. His voice would be cracking, panic seeping through his arrogant facade. I did my part, Camila would snap, her eyes narrowing. Maybe your old man wasn't as clueless and broken as you thought. She would sweep the shards of glass into a bin with a sharp, angry motion. Julian would freeze, his face paling as he finally understood. I could picture him yanking open the safe, only to find the empty space where the report had been. I drove home, oblivious to their panic but acutely aware that I was now a player in a dangerous game. My first strike had landed. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You made a mistake. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, the road ahead blurring for a moment. They knew. Or at least, they suspected. The quiet satisfaction of my victory was now laced with a cold dose of fear. The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and precedent, its shelves heavy with legal tomes that seemed to absorb all sound. I sat across from Marcus Thorne, my old friend and now my attorney, a stack of Eleanor's old letters placed carefully between us. These prove I co-founded Vanguard, I said, my voice firm. Julian systematically pushed me out and stole my shares. Marcus's eyes widened as he read Eleanor's precise, elegant handwriting. She had meticulously documented our early days, the initial investments from our savings, the business plan she helped me write, the all-night coding sessions. Her signature on an early partnership agreement was a legal anchor in the storm. She told me to keep these, I said, a memory surfacing with painful clarity. Ellen's voice, calm but insistent. Just in case, Arthur. Business can change people. Marcus nodded, his pen scratching notes on a legal pad. We can file an injunction and a lawsuit for your stake in the company. It's solid, Arthur. But it's risky. Julian won't go down without a fight. I touched the photo in my pocket, her strength flowing into me. The risk is worth it. In the preliminary courthouse hearing, the air was thick with tension. I stood, my suit crisp, as Marcus presented our case. Julian sat across the room, his face a mask of incandescent fury. Camila whispered constantly in his ear, her eyes darting towards me with venom. The judge's gavel fell, demanding a response. Mr. Vance, he said, addressing Julian. He's lying. Julian spat, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. It's the desperate fantasy of a bitter old man. The room stilled. Marcus calmly held up one of Eleanor's letters, its aged paper a testament to its authenticity. The weight of it seemed to silence Julian. Camila's hand gripped his arm, her whisper sharp and urgent. We're done here. I watched them, my heart steady but heavy. This was justice, but it carried the undeniable pain of a family disintegrating. The hearing ended, and reporters buzzed around us like flies. In the corridor, Julian cornered me, his breath hot with rage. You'll regret this, he hissed, his eyes blazing. I met his gaze, unflinching. You started this, son. The day you forgot who you were and where you came from. I walked away, the echo of my steps followed by another set of footsteps behind me. Too close. Too deliberate. My hand tightened on my car keys, the metal biting into my palm. The park was quiet, its paths strewn with the damp, golden leaves of a Seattle autumn. They crunched under my boots as I walked to a weathered bench overlooking the water. Trevor had called, his voice tight with something new, fear. He insisted we meet here. Eleanor's photo rested in my pocket, her presence a silent comfort. A memory flickered, Julian, age 6, clutching my hand at this very park, promising he'd never let me down. They arrived together. Julian's face was drawn and pale, Camilla's eyes were sharp but unsteady. He sat on the bench opposite me, his hands twisting the cuff of his expensive shirt. "Dad," he began, his voice low and strained. "Stop this. The lawsuit, Ben Carter's investigation, call it all off." Camilla leaned forward, her bracelet glinting in the gray light. "We'll cut you in, Arthur. Money, shares, a consulting fee. Name your price." I stared at my son, now a stranger offering to buy my silence. "You think my dignity has a price?" My words were calm, but they cut deep. Julian flinched. "I made mistakes," he said, his voice softer now. "But we're family. Remember when we built that model airplane together? You and me against the world." Camilla's lips curled into a sneer. "Don't be so stubborn, Arthur. If you push this any further, it's going to get messy for everyone." Her threat hung in the air, but her voice held a tremor of desperation. I stood, my shadow long on the damp grass. "You stole my life's work, Julian. You dishonored your mother's memory. Now you pay the price." I walked away, their pleas and threats fading behind me. At home, Eleanor's letters lay on the kitchen table, their ink a map of my fight. The final court date was tomorrow. My final strike. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Court tomorrow. Be ready." A noise outside, the low crunch of footsteps on the gravel driveway, made me pause. I moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain just an inch. The courtroom buzzed, a hive of whispers and rustling papers. I sat in the front row, Eleanor's letters in my briefcase, their weight a solid, anchoring presence. The judge's voice cut through the noise, steady and final. After reviewing the evidence presented, including the verified correspondence of the late Eleanor Vance and the financial records uncovered by the press, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Arthur Vance. Full ownership and control of Vanguard Innovations is hereby restored to him. Furthermore, this court finds Julian Vance and Camilla Reed guilty of corporate fraud and embezzlement. The gavel fell, its crack as sharp as a rifle shot. Julian's face drained of all color, his tie suddenly askew. Camilla gripped her purse, her knuckles white, her eyes darting towards the exit as if seeking an escape. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, their cameras flashing, capturing the moment of my vindication and their ruin. Ben Carter's investigation, fueled by my stolen report, had laid their entire criminal scheme bare on the front page of the Seattle Times. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. Truth always finds the light. She was right. Handcuffs clicked as two bailiffs approached their table. Julian's defiant shout, "This is a lie," bounced off the marble walls, but it was hollow, pathetic. Camilla's head bowed, her defiance finally crumbling into dust. I watched it all, my heart steady but heavy. A grim sense of justice, but no joy, filled me. An old colleague in the back of the courtroom caught my eye and gave a slow, respectful nod. Outside, the Seattle streets were cold, the wind carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. Reporters swarmed me, their questions a chaotic blur. I pushed past them, my coat flapping, and finally reached my car. The radio was already humming with the news. Vanguard Innovations, once a titan of the tech industry, was effectively bankrupt, its glass tower now a hollow monument to greed. I exhaled, a long, slow breath. The weight of 11 years of struggle was lifting, but the scars remained. I glanced at Eleanor's photo, tucked safely in my wallet. "Almost done," I whispered to her. Her smile, as always, held me together. The cemetery was still, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses. I stood before Eleanor's grave, her photograph in my hand, its edges soft from years of being held. The granite was cool under my fingers as I spoke. "It's over, my love. The company is mine again. Julian and Camilla, they're facing prison time. A breeze stirred the leaves around the headstone, a soft whisper that felt like her answer. I had chosen justice over forgiveness, just as she had always taught me to stand for what is right. A memory surfaced, unbidden and vivid. Eleanor, laughing as we slow-danced in our old kitchen to a crackling radio, her voice a warm promise in my ear, "We can face anything, Arthur, as long as we do it together." I had kept that promise. The stolen report, her letters, my fight, they had all brought the truth to light. I knelt and planted a small, white rosebush by her stone, its roots a new beginning in the tired earth. Back at home, the house welcomed me with its familiar creaks. Eleanor's letters rested on the table, their duty done. I knew I wouldn't rebuild Vanguard. Its name was tainted, its foundation rotten. Its assets, however, would go to charity, to schools, shelters, and medical research foundations. Places that mattered. My lawyer called to confirm the final transfers. "You're free, Arthur," Marcus said. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile, sinking into my armchair. The long, bitter fight had changed me, but a sense of peace was finally settling, as soft as the evening light filtering through the window. I placed Eleanor's photo on the mantelpiece, her eyes bright and proud. My phone buzzed. A letter had arrived in the mail from an old friend, a professor, offering me a position to guest lecture, to teach a new generation about ethics in business. I left the letter unopened for now, the envelope catching the warm glow of the sunset. Outside, the world hummed on, but inside, I was still. My hand rested on the old, rusted key that had unlocked so much more than a door. It had unlocked my future.